All right, so this is a follow-up video to my Henry Slug gun. I actually took it hunting today. This was the last day of Illinois deer season, and you get to do antlerless deer hunting with your gun if you want. In this case, of course, in Illinois at this time, it is a shotgun state and or muzzleloader state, depending on the season. And so I picked up this Henry 12 gauge slug gun with a slug barrel, obviously. You can see that it has iron sights on it that came from factory that way. And I provided a little video of it previously. So this was literally my first hunt with it. And I was lucky enough to harvest a doe, and I'll show that in a moment. I'm still debating whether or not to put a scope on the gun. I felt it was very handy when I went off and trailed the deer after shooting it, and it didn't go very far. But just being able to hold the gun like that and walk through the woods was very nice versus having a little bit of awkwardness of the additional scope that's on the gun. But I didn't really feel, going on a little bit about pros and cons of putting a scope on this. I still may do so. Again, the light was starting to come down near sunset when I was able to harvest the deer. I still had no problem shooting it. It was a clean shot. But I noticed, this is the first time I really used iron sights to hunt, or open sights, however you want to refer to it. And it was just a little bit different. Like I knew I hit the deer. I saw it do the hop and so forth. But it was just something a little different when you don't have that zoomed in view with that X right on the skin of the hair of the deer. So it felt a little different. So it was kind of a unique experience for me. But picking it up and getting it on target was no problem at all, even in some pretty thick woods. The other maybe slight disadvantage of not having a scope on the gun, when the deer was kind of walking off, I knew it was hit. Sometimes I like to do a follow-up shot, and it just seemed like a scope would have helped a little bit when it started getting into a little bit thicker brush from my viewpoint. Again, that's kind of iffy. I'm not really sure the scope would have helped a lot, but in some ways it would have provided just a little bit more magnification on the deer so I could kind of see if it was hurt when it was sitting down and stuff. I knew it was, and maybe do an extra follow-up shot. I'd shot the deer probably right around 40 to 50 yards. It could have been a little closer. I'll show you a picture of that and in a moment. Again, I've been using a 20 gauge H&R Ultra Slug gun for most of my gun hunting in Illinois. I do a lot of bow hunting. So I think it wasn't too big of a disadvantage to have the open sights for the most part. In some ways, it may have been easier to hold the gun, faster to get on target, maybe. Because sometimes when you have a scope and you're in this heavy wooded environment, sometimes you might lose your animal while you have both of your eyes available for the open sights. And so those were some things to consider. The 20 gauge versus 12 gauge, I've shot plenty of deer with both 20 gauge and 12 gauge. And I find that for the most part, I don't see the deer really, noticing the difference. And in both cases, they die about the same rate. If you do a good shot, put in good shot placement, I've found that the deer, for the most part, don't seem, they seem to die about the same rate. They don't see a big knockdown difference between the 12 gauge and a 20 gauge when using good slugs from either gun. Sometimes, even with this deer, I shot it with a 12 gauge. It was a pretty good sized doe. And let me show you that. Actually, before I show you the doe, kind of give you kind of an idea of where I was hunting. So I was sitting right in here and literally just sitting on the ground. So that's another thing. Don't be afraid to sit on the ground gun hunting. I was not in a blind. I was sitting in my orange, literally right on the ground. And I killed 2 deer like that this year doing that. You know, you just stay very still. You know, I'm kind of near a few trees, but nothing. I know I didn't do a lot to try to hide. And then the deer came across this way along the opposite ridge. And again, I'm thinking it was probably 40 to 50 yards. And just kind of meandered. I'd heard it coming through the woods first, and then just maybe right in here, it may have thought of, I don't know for sure if it saw me or not, but you know, it was just a little bit of hesitation. Then it continued walking. And then basically I shot it probably right here where my pointer is. So I waited till it cleared these 2 trees, and this was about right where I hit it. I don't think it was as far down as this, but it was right in this area. I think it was actually between these trees. And again, that was with naked sights. At the end, it kind of ran up this way. And again, it kind of did a leap, so I knew it was hit. And then it kind of went into these woods over here, or the upper part of this woods right here. I saw it lay down and kind of do its head thing, got back up and kind of walked this way and far back in the ridge. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to back out for a moment. And then I heard it crashed. So I jumped on, got out and got on my 4-wheeler, came around this ditch area. And then with a little bit of looking, I found the deer just laying right where I heard it crash. I didn't even really try to look for blood too much. It was getting kind of dark, and I felt pretty confident where I'd heard it crash. Here's another perspective. Okay. Gun. There's some birds. You know, the typical stuff you see when you winter hunt. And so here's the doe. You can see it was coughing up some lung. I'd actually shot on the opposite side of this picture as far as I was walking across the screen, or, you know, on the previous screen I showed you. So it was hit about right here and went forward, and I believe it kind of came out somewhere in this area, or at least, or maybe on the skin of the side. It destroyed at least 1 lung when I did the autopsy, and a little bit of broken leg on this opposite shoulder. So it came through this way. Again, I have not felt undergunned with a 20 gauge after killing a few deer with a 20 gauge. And again, picking good slugs. I didn't see much more of a knockdown speed with a 12 gauge, but there are some much more powerful 12 gauge slugs out there than what I used. I did use Hornady. I've used a variety of Hornadys, but this time it was actually a custom light, so it was a little bit lighter on the recoil, just because I wasn't paying attention. I don't care what about that kind of stuff. I just went for discounted slugs. It's a saboted slug, as you're going to. I do want to mention one issue I had with this 12 gauge that I want to get back with Henry on. There was a recall on some single shot Henry rifles and shotguns. So I called them up the other day, and there is a concern that you can drop the hammer and cause the gun to fire. They assured me it wasn't related, or it wasn't in a recall on the actual slug guns. But when I came across this deer, I'd actually pulled back the hammer momentarily, just in case, if, you know, the deer was going to get up or something. But it was long gone. And so maybe the excitement or wearing gloves, but I slowly tried to bring the hammer down, and it actually fired which is obviously disconcerting. I don't know if it's the first time it's ever happened to me for a hammered gun to do that. I've never had much trouble getting it to slowly come down. I'm going to buy a little bit of a hammer spur for it. I'm also going to go out tomorrow in my backyard and test to make sure that I can set it down slowly enough that it does not shoot. I'm also going to call Henry again and just tell him my experience, because I've never had a situation where when I've let the hammer down, I would have a discharge. Again, it may have moved a little faster than I realized, because again, I was wearing gloves at that moment. It's a very crisp trigger on this gun, which is great for accuracy, but may be an issue for this kind of stuff. So anyway, in conclusion, the gun's beautiful. It did exactly what I wanted it to do right out of the box. The first hunt with my new gun got me a doe. I consider any harvest a trophy. I'm always excited and happy, even when the deer isn't a buck. I always am excited about it and happy about it. I'm looking forward to having lots of meals with it and sharing meals from this deer harvest. Again, I'm a little concerned about the hammer. I don't want that to be a reason for somebody not to get the gun. I'm sure Henry will make it right, or I will double check that it wasn't a mistake on my part and put a little spur on it. I'm still kind of leaning towards not putting a scope on the gun. It was very easy to carry it through the woods like that, and it worked really well. The only drawback was not having a scope to kind of see what the deer was doing when it kind of meandered off about 50 yards from where I shot it, because of the woods, so to speak. In some regards, I don't know if it made any difference if I had a scope or not a scope in this case, on that initial shot. But there's pros and cons to scope and no scope, but you shouldn't be afraid to not just use your iron sights. 12 gauge versus 20 gauge, again, I think for all practical aspects of hunting within 100 yards, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you get decent ammunition. Now, there are some amazing 12 gauge slugs out there that are in another realm, like light field, where you get to about 4,000 foot-pounds of energy. Some of those really over-the-top slugs. But the typical deer hunting slugs, the 12 versus the 20, doesn't seem to make much difference. That's probably when you would see it if you went with a massive 12 gauge type slug. In either case, I've never had any problem for the most part with a 20 gauge slug either. So you shouldn't feel undergunned that way. I think it's a moot point for whitetail deer hunting anyway. So again, I'm really happy with this purchase, really happy with my harvest. It was a great last minute doe to finish up a pretty slow deer season for me. And I'm taking it to the butcher shop. I got it all cleaned and ready to go. So anyway, thanks for watching these videos. If you're interested in a slug gun, I highly encourage you to consider getting the Henry. Anyway, take care.